Pigs Radio Company presents another one of our wonderful premier programs to help people. Welcome to the Transplant Zone podcast. And this is for all the people who are in the transplant zone. Please tell us your story. And that's exactly what Gary is going to do. How did this all begin?
Hi, I'm Gary and I'm back. I expect to be here for a long time because now I have to have the transplant, but I would plan on showing you what it's like to go through it. So I don't know if we have pictures in the hospital or whatever, but because I figured I'd be here doing this for a while, I had a cap made. And that cap, as you see, talks about the transplant zone. Now, this is a new podcast, and we don't know exactly how far to go, but that all depends on what you want. My plan is to interview people that have had transplants and are going to, so that they can tell and give you the story of what it's like. And those are things that you cannot just discern. But as the story goes along, how I got to this point was on my 40th birthday. I just turned 40. I had a major heart attack, and I lived through that. And I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, Gary, I said, this indigestion is killing me. And he said, looked at me and he checked everything out, and he said, well, you think you've had a heart attack? I said, oh no. And so he said, well, we're going to run an EKG on you just to make sure. I don't want to send you home. Well, they did that, and he got up and he looked funny. And he said, Gary, stay right here. I'm going to go out of the office for just a minute. He said, where's your wife? And I said, well, she's at work. I said, you've got her phone number? And he said, yeah. I said, here's my phone, just call her. And so he went outside, and the next thing I knew, here comes a mob of people in the room. And he says, we don't want to scare you, but you've had a heart attack. And I said, really? And he said, you have what they call a silent heart attack. And everybody that knows me knows that I am not silent. I can talk to anybody anytime. So at that point, they called EMS. The guy comes in with all the stuff, and he looks at me and he says, Gary, he said, you've had a heart attack according to EKG. And I said, well, I don't feel like it. I just feel like indigestion. And he looked at me. He did an EKG. He said, don't move, don't speak, which was very hard, and don't get up. And he says, you're going to the hospital. I said, do I drive myself? He said, oh no, we got the medical heart attack ambulance outside. We got all the stuff on it. So they took me and put me on a gurney, and they wouldn't even let me stand up by myself. They had to assist me to get on the gurney. And I'm going, this is a bunch of, well, crap. I'm able to get up there myself. And so they rolled me out. And by then they had talked to my wife, and she goes, I'll just meet y'all at the hospital. And I said, okay. And so I didn't think any more of it until I got to the hospital. And then later they told me at the hospital how bad the heart attack was. And they said, you may not ever see your son graduate high school. And I go, what? It's pretty bad. So they got me stable, and then they did what they call bypass surgery. And so after I had the bypass surgery, felt pretty good. It took me a little while to recover. I'd go out and walk 10 feet more every day than I did the day before. And I had places picked out where I could sit and rest. And so I got through that. And then we had some other stuff happen, like when the tornado hit our house, and when it hit, we had to move out, of course, and they had to do the work. Well, that was a blessing. And it's really amazing that it was a blessing, because I was allergic to the sheetrock dust. When we moved back in, I had to go to the hospital again. And then the doctors had did a MRI and different things to see if I had any more lesions inside my body. And guess what they discovered? I had an aortic aneurysm, and it was dissecting. So I go to the hospital, get that done, and when I'm getting ready to leave the hospital, an interesting thing happened. They were getting me up, to make sure I could walk. And one of the nurses let go of me, and I fell back into the chair. So I dislodged a blood clot and had a stroke. So I was in there a few more days, but that didn't stop me. And so what I've learned in all these troubles, you never give up no matter what. So, and if you think you can't do it, call me and I'll come and talk to you. But after that, more things happened. We got our house. We kind of lost our house. We only got like $20,000 out of equity for the house, but that we didn't think we would ever own a home anymore. So my wife, with all this stuff going on, she had a stroke. And when you have a stroke, everything changes. So my idea was to look after her. Well, one of our friends came and said, I'm looking at buying a house. We were actually living with one of Tanya's best friends in her condo upstairs, because we couldn't go back into the house and all that. And she said, I want you to come and look at this house with me and see what you think. And she said, it needs a lot of work. And there was only one commode that worked. One sink in the bathroom sink was messed up. And she had bought it on a foreclosure or whatever. And so when we were walking around looking, I said, well, this is a good house. It's an old house. I said, it's in a perfect location. And I said, you'll do well with that. And then she turned around and looked at me. She said, well, do you want hardwood or do you want carpet in it? And I said, wait a minute. What are you saying? Well, you don't happen often, but we were all in a Bible study together. And she went beyond caring for us. She bought the house. She had the floors redone, and they were doing really good. And then she'd fix a little bit at a time, and we moved the washer and dryer over there, or people did. I didn't move anything. I was just kind of sitting around waiting to heal. So we lived in that house for 15 years. And actually, that's where we live today. But her grace and her just going, Gary, do you want carpet and all? And I was kind of scratching my head and going, what's going on? And then she said, you and your wife need your own place. I said, wait a minute. We still got the other house we're making payments on, and we can't even afford to pay the light bill. She said, that ain't what I asked you. Do you want hardwood or do you want, carpet? And I said, well, hardwood. She said, well, I'm going to pay the electric bill, the water bill, and all that stuff. And I said, well, we can't pay you rent. She says, no, but you'll have a place that you and your wife can recover. And, my family didn't help, which is amazing. That's what families should do, but it took a stranger, not blood related, that was in our Bible study to do this. And so we just keep moving further and further away from the hospital, in a sense that I wasn't in the hospital every day. And after a while, we had something interesting happen. One of the doctors, the heart, he said, Gary, he said, you've got AFib. I said, well, what's AFib? He said, well, your heart's racing and beating out and all that. I said, oh, that's what I felt. And he goes, oh, yeah. He said, we're going to shop your heart, and you're going to be technically dead again. And he said, then we're going to reboot you. And that works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. So they did that, and, at least I was asleep during that. And they said when I woke up, I was talking already. And asked the doctor how it went. And then it lasted for a little while, and then they said I needed to have ablation. And I go, what in the world is that? And they said, well, we're going to burn your heart. It's an electrical problem. And I'm going, oh, the electrician. You can call in. He said, yeah. So they did that. And then I got a picture that shows the difference in my heart when everything was arcing. And I said, well, it's like I got some wires that are crossed over and, affecting each other. He said, that's exactly right. And I said, wow. So then the trail gets longer and longer, and I had my first bypass surgery after that. And then I had a second bypass surgery. And so about every 10 years I was in the hospital, they were working on my heart again. And the last time I went, the doctor looked at me, he said, Gary, he said, you got AFib and all this. We need to put a pacemaker in you. And I said, really? I said, I don't feel like I need one. And they looked at me and he goes, oh yeah, you need it. And we're going to put a defibrillator in it also. And I go, well, what does it do? He said, it kicks you like a horse. And I always remember that now. So when he did that, I got a letter in the mail about 3 years later that they had recalled my defibrillator because the batteries were, I think, from China, and they were corroding and everything. And he said, you're not going to have to pay for this, but we're going to do that. I said, well, what happens? He said, well, you don't want acid near your heart. And I go, okay, let's do it. And so they did that. And then, maybe a year later, I was very active. I still didn't slow down. And my wife still tells me I need to slow down a little bit. But anyway, I was at Lowe's loading up border stones for the flower bed. It was our anniversary, and we usually work out in the yard. Well, as I was picking up the bricks or the borders, whatever you want to call them, I felt a little busy, so I sat back in my car. And when I sat back in the car on the tailgate, the next thing I know, I was all the way in the back of the car, passed out. And I didn't even know I had the defibrillator to go off. And people were running towards me and said, are you all right? Are you all right? And I said, well, yeah, I feel fine now. I said, I just got a little bit dizzy. Do we need to call 911? And stupid me said, no. So I went home, and I'm getting a telephone call from Duke because my new defibrillator and pacemaker has a link to Duke. And whenever it goes off or anything, it sends them a feed. And they can look at it and they go, Gary, what did you do today? I said, well, were you dizzy? Did you pass out or anything? I said, well, it's kind of fuzzy, but I was in Lowe's loading bricks. And he goes, tell me you won't doing that. I said, yeah. I said, one at a time. And, when I started getting a little fuzzy feeling, I would stop and sit there for 5 minutes, and then I'd pick up 2 more. And I could see him in my mind's eye shaking his head and going, what am I going to do with this stubborn guy? And I said, well, he said, pack a bag. You need to come in here. I said, what's going on? He said, well, your defibrillator went off and you were in tachycardia, I think it is. He said, it saved your life. And you were such a hard person to get the defibrillator and agreed to it. he said, but it was the right decision. So I don't know how much time we give, and I need to wrap it up or not and start another session later. But I'm going to go ahead and go until they give me the signal to stop. We are a low budget. Actually, we have no budget. But this stuff is too important for you not to know it or to be blessed by it. So if you're having any heart problems or you think you are, you call me. My phone number, and I'm just going to give it to you, is 919-244-6043. And I will pick up. If I don't, leave me a message. If your wife needs to call me. So I did all that, and then actually I died again. I had COVID, and that was interesting. It was $500,000 to get over COVID, but one of the things they did, they took me off of my blood thinner for a while to take this medicine. So I woke up one morning and I felt really strange. I got up and I had a hard time, and the next thing I knew, I hit the floor. I had had a stroke from the COVID. And I go, wow. And so my wife called my son over and said, your dad won't go to the hospital. And he is an occupational therapist. And it only happened about 5 days. So he jumped in his car and came on over. He lives about 3 miles away with the grandkids. And he said, Mom? I was laying there on the floor. He said, I'm not going to even get him off the floor because Dad's had a stroke, and you need to call 911 and tell him he's had a stroke. And he's also had COVID. So here we go to the hospital doing all that mess, and they put me in isolation because they didn't want me to give COVID to anybody. And I'm going, wow, this is really interesting. And I said some other things, but we won't go into that. I said, I can't believe this happened. And the doctor said, well, Gary, he said, you're blessed. You've lived through. We're going to start calling you Cat around here because so many lives you've had. And we've sat down and figured it out. I've been dead about 7 times. Different, some were just a little bit and some were long. Well, then I was going through my dad's stuff, and my brother and all them were doing all kinds of crazy stuff. We won't go into that, but I had heart failure and my feet started swelling. So I called the doctor up and said, hey, heart doctor, I probably need to come in. And he said, what's going on? And I said, well, I just don't feel the best and my feet are swelling and I'm retaining fluid. So I went there and they gave me a bunch of diuretics. And man, when they give you that, you better have 2 or 3 urinals standing by because they wouldn't let me get out of the bed and they were just passing them. And my wife said, man, I lost 15 pounds overnight. Did I sleep? No. I was just throwing my legs over the bed and using the urinal. And they measured it, and it was like 3 of those big liter bottles of Coke in fluid. And I said, man, that's a lot. He said, yep. He said, that's why we're having some problems. And so I went home, and then a little later on, something happened that was interesting. And they said, we need to do a heart cath on you again. And I've had so many that I said, you can't do the right side anymore because I've got so much scar tissue. They had to do a graft to allow the blood from my heart that was pumping, about 20%. It would, the blood, they did a graft from there. So let's see here. I've had all this stuff going on, and by the grace of God, I'm still alive, and I don't plan on going anywhere.
Gary, what I'd like to know now is take us right to the decision where you are now on total machine.
Okay. Well, when I was getting a heart cath, I died in the hospital. And guess where I was? I was in Duke. And that was a blessing because they have something like an LVAD. Well, it was so bad that they put a balloon in my shoulder up here, some kind of balloon. I don't know how it works or anything, but it helps the heart move the blood through you. And I woke up at ICU. I said, my shoulder hurts. And they said, don't be touching that. We put a balloon up there. I go, what? And then my wife was talking about LVADs. I didn't know what in the world an LVAD was. So the doctor didn't want to put one in that does them. They wanted to send me home with hospice. And I go, that kind of sucks. And I didn't know all the rest of the story, but one of the doctors had convinced the other doctor that I was a stubborn person and I had more stuff to do. And so he talked him into doing it. And here I am recovering from a stroke and getting ready to have major heart surgery. And I was in ICU for 11 days before they did the LVAD. And that was very interesting because I kept going, where's everybody? You know, what's going on? And my wife was trying to talk to me about the LVAD. And then I said, well, yeah, go ahead and do it. She said, well, I already made that decision. You're going to have it because I don't want to be here on earth without you. I said, okay. And so I had the surgery. And now I have a motor up here and I wear batteries, so I'm going to flash you a little bit. There's one here, and a computer here. I have no pulse to speak of, and my blood pressure, they have to use a Doppler to figure out somewhat what it is. And I hum all the time, not from my mouth, my chest. I sound like a music box. And so if you want to hear more about this, go to my website and let me know. It's Help I Will, and we're getting the Transplant Zone up. And tell me what your questions are. And if you're willing to be on the podcast, we accept all people, short, small, big, it don't matter. And the most important thing is you. It's not about me as much as it is about you. So we want to hear your stories and know what you're feeling. Now, since we're on a budget of not spending much, if you want to help, you can donate or send me a check or whatever. Now, anything that goes in the Help I Will is now a LLC, but that's a different story. When the Lord sent me back after I died, getting the motor put in me in the heart cath time, then he told me I had more work to do. So I'm not going to give up, and don't you. And there's all kinds of new technology and stuff. So I'll just say goodbye, and I'll be listening to hear from you. You have my phone number, and you can call me anytime, day or night, it doesn't matter. I may not hear it at night because I don't sleep with my hearing aids in. So take care. God bless you.
Wow, what an incredible story. Can you imagine that? My goodness. Hey, yes, living in the transplant zone is life-changing, life-altering, and of course, life-threatening. And oh, to you brave souls who are going through that process, who are right in the middle of perhaps the transplant action itself, and those of you who are always, rest of your life in the transplant zone, we are here to try and bring not only a word of encouragement and courage, but from time to time, as best we can, help us come together, live better together, and of course, share our stories and experiences and our wisdom with one another. As Gary will point out, in some respects, it has given him new meaning and purpose in life that he never had before. And he's determined to be the best he can in the life that he has, and to actually be blessings to others, as well as the fact that he has been blessed. Yes, my name is Stan. I'm the radio man. I'm the leader of the what we call What It Takes Radio Network. We are a podcasting and publishing service. And if you would like to do something like Gary is doing, I can help you. Just reach out to me at stan@witradio.net. Stan@witradio.net. My purpose is to tell the big people who have the big stations that it's time to give airtime, radio and video time, to the people who are really living life and making a difference, just like Gary and just like you. So reach out to me. As I said, it's stan@witradio.net, stan@witradio.net. Gary left you some of his information. If you'd like to pass on some message to Gary through me, please do so. And we have another program coming up next week. And at that time, Gary is going to talk a little bit. He's going to shorten his talk, I think. He's going to be a little brief, but what is it like to live for 25 years in living on the edge, which we are doing? All the best and blessings to you. May it go well for you. Follow your doctor's orders. May you be blessed as you live and share your story in the transplant zone.